Hello there, John Couturiello here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining us for this episode. As usual, thank you to everybody who makes this work possible. And also, as usual, if you have concerns about yourself or somebody else, please never take what you find on the internet or in the media as advice. Seek advice from a professional or somebody else that you trust. If you are in Australia and are seeking counselling from me, you can find my details in the description of this episode. And today, it's my pleasure to welcome my guest, Darcie Burtch, to the program. Darcie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Darcie, tell us about yourself and what you do.
Well, my name, like you said, is Darcie. I am from Wisconsin, the Cheesehead State. I am a neurolinguistic programmer, so I do this as a practitioner. I also do clinical hypnosis as a practitioner, and then I'm a podcast host of the School of Hard Knocks.
Excellent. To anyone who is looking to find Darcie, you will find her links in the description of this episode. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be discussing neurolinguistic programming. We're going to be discussing what exactly it means and how it works, and we're also going to be questioning different aspects of it and asking, effectively analysing how it works in relation to some other theories of psychology, other theories of psychotherapy and helping and similar. My regular listeners and followers will know that one of the questions that I love asking is, what actually happens in the mind when we do something like psychotherapy or personal helping? What is the mind actually doing as we conduct the process? And when we have theories of psychology about how our minds work, and we can find them in anywhere from popular culture, theories on different types of people in the dating field, different types of people in the workplace, how do you know what personality type you are, etc., etc. Whenever we have a theory, one of the big questions I like to ask is this actually representative of the mind, or is it a construct that we've invented in an attempt to understand the mind? So everything from the types of therapy that I use to anything else, I love to ask that question because it's something that we can never ask too often. Now, to start us, we need some context. Darcie, can you tell us, I understand from the literature what neurolinguistic programming is, but can you tell us in your own words, what exactly is neurolinguistic programming?
So what NLP is, it's the way to be able to connect your subconscious mind to your conscious mind. So our subconscious is recording all day long, right? So we don't have to think about when we're blinking. We don't have to think about when we're breathing. I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but I know I've driven places and thought, oh my gosh, I don't even remember like passing that place. I always see, and it's the craziest thing, and it's our subconscious keeping us safe. So it's a really great way to allow the part of us that knows best what we want, who we are. We do a really great job at pushing things, out of the way to focus on the here and the now. And we're also fast paced that our subconscious, once it's connected to the conscious, is able to slow us down and get us a little bit more based into the reality and desires of what we truly want.
I see. So effectively, neurolinguistic programming, as I understand from the literature, it involves teaching someone to address the unconsciously held beliefs that they may have. And it's specifically with regards to the term linguistic, it addresses the type of unconscious language, the unconscious messages that we hold about ourselves and about the world in order to better take control of how we operate, as opposed to allowing our subconscious to do everything for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just to keep us safe here in our present moment, but it's also to help us with past moments. People who have gone through, like myself, I've gone through childhood trauma. I've gone through traumatic incidents that have happened in my adulthood. And we want to feel safe, and some of us take unhealthy ways to stay safe, and some of us take healthier ways to stay safe. But a lot of times our mind is always playing a scary movie, and we become so disconnected and so dysregulated when there's a very traumatic moment in particular that somebody goes through. So our subconscious is keeping us safe, but if you've ever experienced trauma, you'll understand what fight or flight. You're just in this moment. For me, not recently, 7 years ago, my dad was a survivor of a workplace shooting that left him with a traumatic brain injury. My husband and I actually took care of him for over 4 years, and he passed away 7 months ago in our home. Traumatic. So my body and my brain is trying to do everything that it can to prevent me from feeling all of these scary moments. When you get grounded in like a type of healing, working with NLP or any type of thing that's going to help you grounded in healing, you're able to process through things, like actually process through the things, not push them under the rug, not throw them in a closet. This is designed to actually help us process through something in a healthy fashion.
First of all, Darcie, I'm sorry to hear that your father experienced that, and my deepest condolences to you and your family. I'm fascinated to explore further, what does a neurolinguistic program look like in practice? Can you describe to us some of the techniques and some of the scenes that you might see in the practice of neurolinguistic programming when a practitioner works with a client?
Yes, there's actually several. I have my favorites. One program that I love so much is called swishing. So what that allows us to do is to take the person that you see yourself as now and swish it, the vision of it, into the person that you want to see yourself as, who your desired person is. We live our lives for a long time stuck in one way, and although we may want to be something else, we're really working with a lot of the tools that we have in our everyday. So for instance, I worked with a woman who considered herself to be a monster mom. She felt like she was aggressive towards her daughter. She wasn't excited about doing things that included other children. She was just quick to anger. So we took that vision that she sees herself as and ask her, who is it that you would like to emulate? Who is a mother characteristically that you would like to be like? And when she got that vision in her mind, we start swishing those pictures back and forth until she can no longer even see who she currently views herself as. So it's a really cool program. I mean, I've done it with people who have bouts of anger, that want to see themselves as somebody who's not that angry person. A lot of people, they're simply stuck. They're just simply stuck. And using your own words and your own terminology as a way to become unstuck, that's what NLP is helping you to do.
Does it involve psychoeducation at all? Does the practice involve psychoeducation? For the audience, that means essentially teaching people insight into what their minds are doing and how they work in order to allow the person to better take control.
Not really. And the only reason why is because we want you working with your own knowledge. So if we start putting different things into your mind, that may potentially sway your initial desire. That may potentially sway your initial way of framing things, the verbiage that you're going to use, the things you're going to say or ask. So it's not keeping anybody unclear about what you're going to be doing. You're in charge. I'm the guide. So I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply working with you. You're doing all of the work, which is really cool. But I don't want you using any of my terminology or any of my verbiage. Now, as I start to see clients, they're learning more and more as we're going through it, but they're also getting stronger and getting grounded in their healing as we're going through it. So they're already feeling the strength of the goal, the end purpose, the result of what it is that we're looking for, versus just throwing a bunch of knowledge at somebody immediately that your brain may do this. We don't know what it's going to do, because how willing are you to actually participate? This isn't a pill, this isn't a word, this isn't a wand, it's nothing. It's you having to use your own verbiage and terminology to help you get to wherever it is that you're looking to be.
See, so effectively, would you say that the process allows somebody to synthesize knowledge of themselves through their own process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we know who we are. It's just as very clouded a lot of the times, about what we're watching on social media, what we're listening to, what we're choosing to allow in our life. But when you allow somebody a simple question, just asking simple questions and getting information from them, they're able to really start to break down who they know that they are. because they're having the moment to do it. Not a lot of people ask you throughout the day, certain questions like what your pain point is, what your fear is, how you feel emotionally in your own verbiage. Who do you want to see yourself as? What are the things that bring you joy? What bring you happiness? A lot of people, no one's asking anybody any of these questions. And even so, you would be put on the spot and you would say something real quick and in a hurry. Like when I'm doing a session with people, we are so calm and it's peaceful and it's taking the time, so they never feel like they're put on a spot to have to perform. It's not about performing, it's about finding the words that they need.
Would you be willing to share how neurolinguistic programming worked with you as the client? What did you see?
Well, one of my favorites was something called parts integration. And parts integration is taking two different parts of us. So for me, I have always had not so much a fear of money, but like a disdain of it. When I was growing up, my dad always had this theory that people who had money were snobby. So as I've, gone through my adult life and I have found success, I didn't want money. So I would spend it, or I would give it away, or I would donate it, or do something like that, because I didn't want anybody to think that I was snobby. So during this parts integration, what we were able to do is you have them put their one person in one hand and, the other person in the other hand. So for me, the person that was blocking my enjoyment of money was my dad. And the person that I kind of equated what probably having money and feeling good feels like, I just thought Julia Roberts from Pretty Woman. I don't know why, but we were able to get my two parts to integrate together for the better whole. So, that just has made me look at things so completely differently in how I operate. I don't fear having, as many zeros as there are in the bank account doesn't make me a snobby person or a snooty person. That was such a powerful moment for me and this has been something I have felt for my whole adult life. So to be able to let go of that at 45 years old was a very big deal to me.
That's a fascinating journey. One more question I'd like to ask before we start our analysis here. It does appear that quite a number of people who identify with the life coaching industry, which my audience will know that I've had, to be polite about it, a lot of questions about the industry over the years, let's put it that way. A lot of life coaches seem attracted to this modality. Do we know why that might be as opposed to other modalities that a practitioner may use?
For me, I know that it's because I want my client to be able to use their own desires. I feel like, especially in my experience with being in a medical field and taking care of my dad, I feel like a lot of things are textbook answers. And I don't think everything in life is a textbook answer. I think everybody's situation is different. And everybody's hopes and dreams and ways of healing and processing, they're all different. The healing and grief and, getting through things is not linear for everybody. There's different processes that have to happen. So when you're able to do something along these lines or something similar to it, you have options. It's not just a black and white, this is my program for you, this is what you should do, and this is what's going to work for you. Well, how do I know that? I'm not that person. So when we're building something together, like I said, I'm working with them. They're actually building it because it's what they want in their words, in their terminology, which makes it easier for them to want to complete, going through the cycle of it because they're designing it. I'm not designing it for them.
I like that ethos. Helping the client deal with their subjective reality is incredibly important. So I very much concur with that. Let's discuss in depth some of the specific components that you've described to us here. For the sake of our audience, I'm going to discuss the psychology of all of these. And let's just first address the subconscious. Now, we know that the subconscious exists, or unconscious processing. We don't entirely know the nature of it yet, and even though the first theories regarding unconscious processing existed over 100 years ago, but we do know that the brain can process information and conduct activity without us being aware of it. And we have certain types of tests like implicit association or computer-assisted tasks that can actually demonstrate that or provide evidence that there are processes happening underneath consciousness. So we certainly know that it exists. We have a number of different, first of all, theories to explain why linguistics is relevant to the unconscious. How does language get processed unconsciously? And from what I know, and I would argue possibly the most comprehensive theory that we have about the relationship between language and the unconscious is sometimes referred to as a network theory or network processing theory. And it effectively argues that the different pieces of information in our brain are like the pieces on a computer network. We have different components in a computer network, and physically, when two components are closer together, it is easier for them to operate together. So, for example, if you have a concept in your mind of something that you like, and it's closer to the concept of positivity, then it's easier for you to feel positively or become positively activated when that concept is activated as well. To give you an example, let's say that I really like apples, and somebody shows me the word apple, and they're playing a word association game with me. If I see the word apple, I'm more likely to associate that with a positive word because in the theory, the concept of an apple is closer to the concept of something I like, something positive. If I really don't like kumquats, for example, and that's closer to the concept of negativity, then if someone shows me a kumquat, it's easier for me to become negatively activated because that concept is closer to the concept of negativity. And the theory suggests that our brain arranges information this way because it helps us categorize information. If we have concepts of what we like and what we don't like, or what is good or bad, or what is positive or negative, however we evaluate these different things in the world, it makes sense for our brain to put the things that are good for us, that are positive, closer to other things that are positive because it helps us to recognize the positivity. It helps us to organize them. I'm wondering, does neurolinguistic programming make any postulations about information processing or about why evolutionarily we might process information that way?
I mean, I would say the interesting thing about that is the way that our brain may process things isn't the way the human body responds to it, reacts to it. You know, it's very interesting that the brain is like a computer, right? I mean, when my dad's injury happened, things had to synapses over to different places in order to have him even feed himself a little bit, to have him start to learn to talk again. With him being in his coma, I asked him if he could hear me, you know, because that's supposed to be such a touchy, I don't know if people can. He told me that he could. He knew that we were there the entire time. It's a very interesting thing. What our brain is comprehending isn't necessarily what we're going to do. So it's really hard for me to decipher while I'm meeting with somebody. You know, I'm going to hope that they're very much in alignment with what it is that we're doing and what we're talking with. You can tell by somebody's breathing. You can tell by how their eyes are moving. You can tell by how they move their body, how your rapport is when you're building rapport. You can tell all of this. But there's a lot of people that can match a mirror that very well will walk right out of your office and go right back to living their same life because they're making a decision to do it. You know, so that's the thing that gets so tricky with a brain. Unless if we are really into training a brain how to almost take commands like it's a robot in real time, we still are able to overpower what we think is right and wrong, what we think is good and bad. So although NLP is able to work with these things, your subconscious mind and your conscious mind, ultimately that client's making the decision based upon whatever they feel is right for them.
This is an interesting conceptualization that how we comprehend something isn't necessarily congruent with how the body responds to it. This raises a question about what it means to comprehend something. Now, if we talk about comprehension as a conscious operation, that is to say that it means what we actually recognize is happening in our brain, then yes, we could say that's the case, because if we consciously decide to operate in a certain fashion, to make certain choices, to conduct certain actions, to think in certain ways that are going to help us, to the best of our knowledge, achieve the goal, but our body is still reacting in distress, most likely, as far as we know, it most likely indicates that there are unconscious processes contributing to that distress. So even though we consciously are thinking something or are making certain decisions, there are unconscious processes contributing to that distress. But then that raises the question of, is the unconscious does what happened at the unconscious level represent comprehension? Because to say that how we comprehend something and how our body reacts to it is different, that is to assume that comprehension is always at the conscious level. But if our body is reacting in a certain way, does that not mean that there is probably some unconscious comprehension happening, that we understand that something has happened, something has gone wrong, and we simply haven't learned to address it yet?
Yeah, I mean, our whole body is a living, breathing thing. You know, every nerve, every muscle, every tendon, every joint, it all feels sensation. So if you're somebody who has gone through something where you've been in a fight or flight, you've been in a trauma response, your body more than likely is going to remember how it responds to that kind of sensation. You know, it's kind of like if you touch a hot stove, your body is going to know when you touch a hot stove to pull it away. Well, it's the same thing. You're in a traumatic situation, your heart rate goes up, you may start to sweat, you have rapid eye movement, your body is like, oh, this is something bad is happening. And it more than likely, what I have experienced in my life with the bouts of trauma I've gone through, it resorts back to a place where it feels like it's safe. It goes back to a learned behavior. You know, so the whole thing about, regardless of what it is that if you're doing an NLP, you're doing something else, whatever it is that's helping you is what's important. But being able to reteach the system, the nervous system, the whole thing has to get retaught. I myself, from going through levels of trauma, have had to learn multiple different things when something arises to not go into that panic, because that's just how I've always been aware something is happening. So it's a reboot. It's almost like having to reboot your whole system.
So in a manner of speaking, we could say that the way that we consciously comprehend and the way that our body reacts is different, but in reality, it's also that our mind does comprehend things that influence how the body works. It's just that what's conscious and what's unconscious are separate.
Yeah, I mean, I would more than likely agree with that. And I think, you know, things take work. Anything takes work. And when you're retraining a muscle, when you're retraining your mind, when you're retraining anything, consistency is key with everything. So even if there was loss at one point or something feels disconnected, doesn't mean that it can't be reconnected. It means that there has to be a valiant effort at being able to have that connection, you know, come back.
Indeed, very much so. I'd like to address the subject of psychoeducation and how we can too easily sway our clients in terms of influencing them or potentially adversely affecting their level of enthusiasm or their level of devotion to the process. Now, I may have discussed this in the past, but it's worth making salient here that people don't understand that often don't understand that psychotherapy can be dangerous, in the sense that if you put words in somebody's mouth or you put ideas into people's minds, if you influence people to think about their issues a certain way, you could inadvertently convince them of something that's not true, or inadvertently convince them to take actions that may not be in their best interests. I've seen that happen to people working with other practitioners. It's quite frightening just how easily a practitioner, when they use the right language and speak to you in just the right way, can actually potentially influence you to believe that something happened when it didn't happen, or influence you to believe that something might be a good idea when a rational person who's not in that vulnerable state may look at the same situation and have a completely different evaluation, and most likely more risk-averse more risk-conscious evaluation of it. So it's very much the case that we don't want to influence people unduly, and at the same time, we also don't want to even influence people to necessarily take our word as gospel, even if those decisions are actually in their best interest, because what it teaches them to do is to be reliant on other people, and that's not healthy. We can't be reliant on other people in the world. We have to have a sense of our own decision making. We have to be able to take care of ourselves that way. Otherwise, when the time comes for us in which we really need that independence, we lack the ability, and that's quite dangerous for us. As a counsellor, I receive referrals from others, and I also like to help my audience become aware of resources and other providers which may be beneficial, as well as help other individuals and organisations gain exposure. That's why I host the Your Listener Partner Network, and I'd like to thank my partners for their support. I'd like to introduce you to Your Recovery. Your Recovery is an online peer support service supporting people navigating addiction and mental health challenges across Australia. Founded by Parislo Matra, who brings both lived experience and formal alcohol and other drugs training, the service offers practical, client-led support without the barriers often found in traditional systems. There are no wait lists, no GP's referrals required, and no expectation to be sober before reaching out. Support is grounded in real-world strategies, routine building, emotional regulation, and navigating everyday life. Your Recovery exists to bridge the gaps between services and provide consistent, accessible support when people need it most. Contact Your Recovery at www.yourrecovery.au. But I'd like to more carefully examine the concept of what it means to actually psychoeducate. And you already discussed that a client of neurolinguistic programming will know approximately what they're going to do in the process, but I'd like to examine psychoeducating more carefully because I make this comparison. When somebody undergoes critical surgery, their surgeon will, if they're a competent surgeon, will explain to them approximately what the process is going to involve, but also the purpose and why it's necessary. Now, psychology over the past 1.5 centuries, approximately, has given us a wealth of quite sound theories about why our minds work the way they do, and we've been able to test them and come to reasonable conclusions that they're valid. I would say that it's actually, in my, and I certainly do this in my practice, quite helpful that when the client is undergoing change, they have an approximate understanding of why it is they're doing what they're doing. And it doesn't mean having to propose to them that there is one solution that will fix their problems. I'd say that's actually unethical practice because there's never a guarantee, especially with these more abstract areas of practice in health. It shouldn't involve giving people a black and white answer that there is a guarantee that a certain process is going to work for them. It also shouldn't involve guaranteeing that a certain type of decision or a certain action in their life is the right one for them. But at the same time, theory does explain why we work the way we do, but it doesn't necessarily propose textbook answers. It provides us a basis for understanding. And what I find has happened to my clients over the years is because they've never been taught insight, because we don't teach psychology as a society, sadly enough, they feel stuck because part of the reason they feel stuck is that they don't feel in control, and part of not feeling in control is not knowing why something's happening. So I would suggest, I would beg the question of, is providing insight to a certain extent, or at least helping the client synthesize insight in a way that's verifiable, or at least theoretically sound, actually, does it actually help liberate? Because when people finally develop that insight, they can finally say, well, now I know why this was happening. Now I'm in a position to actually do something about it. And at the same time, I know why I'm doing it. I'm not simply flying blind.
Yeah, I love that. And that's the really cool thing about NLP and how it works, because it's not my verbiage. It's not what, any practitioner is telling you that this is what you should say, how you should feel, what you should envision. When we go through some modalities, we're not telling you this should be brighter, this should be, we're not doing any of that kind of stuff. In fact, when somebody comes and sits down with me, we have a conversation, they fill out paperwork, we need to know what we're working on. I tell them exactly the programs that we're going to use. Regardless of what it is that they're working on, if they have 5 different things they want to work on, we work on one situation at a time, and we'll use as many programs as it takes to help with that particular situation. So we're not cramming 5 different things into one session and expecting for somebody's brain to take all of that knowledge and figure it out. The other thing that I really enjoy doing is, before we get started into anything, I do a program with them where I have them close their eyes and I walk them through. I get the layout of their house. what their house looks like, and I walk them up to the refrigerator and I tell them to, I do this lemon thing with them where they can actually visualize this and cutting it and all of the things so that they can see how powerful their mind is. Like I have you're salivating and you're swallowing over something that's not in front of you because your mind was able to take you to that spot. Grab the lemon, smell it, cut it, taste it, all of the things so that they can see like this isn't scary work that's happening. This is literally you picturing what it is that you want to do, what you want, where you want to be from a very positive standpoint. We don't talk about negative. We don't have negative words. We don't even allow that into the picture. But when I do that little pre-exercise with them and they can see, whoa, that was really cool. That felt like I could feel the dimples on the lemon and I could taste it and it wasn't there. It just shows them like it's safe for you and it's using your brain, your mind, your ability to be able to accomplish that and make it happen.
When you say you don't allow the negatives into the space, can you expound on what that means?
Yeah, once I actually find out what it is, because most times when I get paperwork in, of course, we're going to talk about the things that need to change, the negative feelings and emotions that they feel about themselves. Once we go through that one time, because we're confirming it, we're talking about it, this is what we're looking at correcting, changing, we're not going to keep bringing that up. So it's that old problem, that old thing, we don't say your anger, your aggression, your, monster mom feeling that you have. We don't bring that back into the picture. Now going forward, after we have the basis, we're going to continue to stay positive, use positive terminology, and words to help get them where it is that they're looking to be. So once we go over that initial thing, we start that initial submodality and we start going up from there. We just take going up. It's a lot easier to stay stuck in the problem, especially when we're stuck. And a lot of people who come to me have been stuck. I was stuck. That's why it's so relatable to me. I did not start my self-love journey until I was 45 years old. My first traumatic memory is at 4. So I lived with trauma and pain and grief and thoughts of all sorts for 40 plus years of my life. So when I am wanting to be in a positive state, bringing up that negative, unless if you're healed from it and you're okay to talk about it because now it's not an activator for you anymore, then that's okay. But to keep putting the negative out there, the problem out there, as bizarre as it may sound, sometimes that's their safe place. That's all they've known. That's how they feel comfortable, and they're going to want to revert back. They're going to want to go back, and then it's going to make it harder for them to see the positive. So the more that we can keep out, the negative and what we're working on and just focus on the positive, the better result we're looking at having.
There are a number of interesting facets to this problem that are fascinating to discuss here. The problem can indeed be a safe space, and it's interesting how that happens. From an evolutionary standpoint, our minds like familiarity. Familiarity is a great sense of psychological security for the reason that if we are familiar with something, we have more knowledge of it than the unfamiliar. And if we have more knowledge of something, we are inherently more equipped to handle it, to know what to do with it, and we have more foresight about what is going to happen in a familiar situation. And so even though something may be consciously unpleasant to us, our mind tends to revert to that situation or that default, being in that problem state, because the familiarity of it, we are innately programmed to seek comfort in that familiarity. That's why the change process is so difficult. And I work with clients with trauma on a regular basis, and one of the reasons that defying those trauma-maintaining behaviors is so difficult is that our minds, after we've experienced trauma, especially when it's young, become so accustomed to enacting those trauma-maintaining behaviors as a safety process that deviating from them feels unsafe. It feels as though if we deviate from them, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the result is going to be. And if we don't know what the result is going to be, then we have reason to fear the unknown. So there is very much it is very much the case that something which is not good for us can actually be a sense of safety, even if we know consciously that it's not good for us. I do have a counterpoint about maintaining problems. Part of the problem that we experience, that any of us can experience, is a psychological phenomenon known as avoidance coping. And avoidance coping simply means refusing to engage with that which is uncomfortable for us. And avoidance coping happens for the same reason that something bad for us can be a safe space. Because when we experience discomfort, we are innately pre-programmed to feel it experience it as a threat, and we avoid threats because to us, we implicitly assume that a threat is going to actually cause something bad to happen to us. So in the same way, even though there are real threats and there are imagined threats, we tend to often conflate the two. There are certain things that are threatening to us. In our earliest days of evolution, land-based predators were a real threat to us. Rival tribes were a threat to us. We register those things as threats for a legitimate reason. But when we experience internal discomfort like anxiety, we often register that as a threat as well, even though it doesn't have the same real consequences as external threats. And there's a reason for that. Emotions like anxiety are designed to draw our attention to real threats. So when we experience them externally, we interpret them the same ways we would interpret external threats. So there is a plausible reason as to why we sometimes treat internal discomfort the same ways we would treat a real threat to our well-being. But the problem is that when we conflate the two, we then potentially lose our ability to deal with life, because life is going to prompt a lot of internal discomfort on a regular basis. It's part of life. If we don't engage with the things that make us uncomfortable, we are limiting what we do in life, and we're limiting how much we have access to, and we're limiting how far we can take ourselves in whichever ways we wish to, by not engaging with the things that make us uncomfortable. Now, I argue, and not every practitioner agrees with me, and that's fine. There are different modalities in psychotherapy that do work, evidently, but I would actually argue that one of the most important things to do is to actually face your internal threats and learn to accept that those threats, not only have they happened in the past, but that they are also inevitably a part of life. That life is going to have difficulties. It's going to invoke internal feelings of discomfort. And we can accept that those things are there, but we don't have to react to them. We don't have to be limited by our internal feelings of threat. We can be more, perhaps, compassionate and thoughtful towards them. And we can, when we have those feelings of threat, we can consciously ask ourselves what we're going to do about them. We don't have to immediately simply recoil from the things that make us uncomfortable. We can ask ourselves what to do in each of those situations. I posit that, yes, it's not good to dwell on problems, and past a certain point in therapy, there will be times where my clients may dwell on problems, and I'll remind them that we don't want that in a compassionate way. But especially early in the therapeutic relationship, I would actually argue learning about those problems and why they occurred is an essential part of the process, because then once the client has accepted that they happen, and accepted that they know why they happened, and accepted that they now have choices, they can then effectively gain closure and say, okay, now I understand those problems, I'm ready to move on to changing the reality through my choices in the present. That's my perspective on the therapeutic process, the metaphysics of therapy, if you will.
Yeah, and I would completely agree, and that's not my wheelhouse. So, my wheelhouse is not to have somebody come in, and I never would want to take away their inability to handle situations properly. In fact, that's what we're doing with NLP. You're still, there's not a magic button that you hit when you come in from NLP and you're faced with a situation. You hit this button and everything's roses. We're learning how to positively handle the situations that are coming at us. The first thing they have to do, though, is deal with the things that have already happened, right? But honestly, when people come in and they're doing any of these sessions, most of them have already been dwelling on this for a long period of time. Most people have, especially when they're coming to a practitioner type of setting, they've already seen a psychiatrist, they've already seen a counselor, they've already tried different medications, they've already tried Reiki, spiritual awakening, all of the things that are being offered, right? And they're just, I need something. One of my clients that I'm seeing this weekend has fired 14 therapists because she wasn't getting what she needed. She felt like everybody wanted the tea from her and that they didn't care so much about how to help her. It was more about, I'm just sitting here listening. And that was her vibe. 14 different therapists that she went through. I talked to her about swishing and setting an anchor to help her in moments when she may be having anxious thoughts or fear or anything like that. And it's totally changed her mind. So this isn't taking people away from the ability to have, we're all in a battle here in the world. It would be completely pointless to disarm anybody. Anybody who's in this area, this niche where we're trying to help people, we're trying to help people that are able to stand on the front lines and be soldiers so that they can live with pain, joy, grief, hurt, all in one container. Because that's what life is. We're going to all experience all of these different emotions and they all have to live in one container for the better good of the human, the person. So nobody who ever leaves a meeting with me feels completely, innate to be able to handle a situation. In fact, my one client, I just helped her with her fear of flights. She said, man, I'm excited to get on a plane in July. It wasn't this fear. It wasn't this, I don't know what I'm going to do if I panic. It was she feels equipped. And that's what I want for my clients.
Absolutely. And I can't say for certain because I don't know them, but I'd say those 14 different therapists that client fired, they made, unfortunately, a mistake that is very common in psychotherapy. It's that a lot of therapists are taught academic psychology, but they're not taught, number one, the phenomenology of change, and number two, therapy is not action focused for them because they're too afraid that it's going to become abrupt. I disagree with that approach, and I have very much railed against that approach for a long time. Therapy has to be a combination, regardless of what modality one uses, it has to be a combination of understanding, safety, and action. It always has to involve action of some description. And as much as possible, when my clients come to my practice, I want, preferably in the first session, to have some action plan, or at the very least, have the client feel comfortable with a plan of action about what we're actually going to do, what they want to work towards, and then what we're going to do to achieve those goals. And it has to be action focused. I'm going to talk about action in just a minute with you, but you're right that there has to be a choice that the client is able to make. There has to be something that they're able to do. The question I suppose arises from that is what one considers to be dwelling on the problem versus what one considers to be insight. So if one is spending appointment after appointment after appointment speaking about the same problems, then unambiguously that is most likely dwelling. If one spends perhaps a short period of time, especially in the first session, talking about the problems, and the therapy process involves empathizing, but also then leading from empathy to a solution, visualizing a solution, then, or at least a solution for the immediate future. I wouldn't say that's necessarily dwelling. It sounds like what you probably do yourself. It's not necessarily dwelling, it's taking the problem and translating understanding into action, into decisions.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be action. There has to be. When my client leaves, I follow up with them 3 days, 7 days, 2 weeks, and a month. I mean, I want to know, do you want this change? What have you applied? What has been different? There's so many ways that we're able to put things into motion, but change is scary. Change is scary for people, and if my client wants to be held accountable, That's what I'm here to help them do. I will follow up with you 4 times in a month period to make sure that you are still doing okay. You are still applying the things that you wanted to apply, right? But it is about taking action. And the thing is too is a lot of people backslide. And that's not a bad thing. That's human. We're human and it's okay. You never fail at anything if you don't take a lesson. But when that backslide happens, you have to pick right back up. You just have to. You have to keep going through it or you're never going to make it through the completion of what it is we're looking to work on.
Absolutely. Sometimes for people, change is very much a process of trial and error. One must try different solutions, but be willing to persist despite the failures effectively, and be willing to try different solutions if one doesn't necessarily work. Now, I'd like to discuss the issue of reification for a minute. Now, people who follow my work know I talk about this quite often, but reification effectively means treating something abstract as if it's concrete, and it's relevant in therapy and in psychology because the phenomenology of change can't really be observed. We make assumptions about it. So when we conduct any type of therapy with someone, we can't see the change process in their mind as it's happening. Perhaps you could take a magnetic resonance image or an MRI of someone's brain and see the neurons firing differently, but that's the physical underlying parts of the change. It's not the change itself. We could listen to the client's reports of how they're feeling better, but that, and again, is a report of the change. It's not the change itself. So when we talk about thoughts and feelings and inner experience, we're reifying them. We assume that they're real. We assume that they're real phenomena because people can describe them, but it's still an assumption. We can't observe thoughts and feelings in the same way that we can observe the physical world. So studying psychology or anything to do with psychology or spirituality involves some reification. An area of great fascination for me is that often different theories with completely different, they're purported to have different bases, but they actually they work in largely the same way, or they describe largely similar ideas. Now, as you've been describing neurolinguistic programming to me, what I've been thinking of is something called acceptance and commitment theory or acceptance and commitment therapy. Are you familiar with this area?
I have not heard of it.
So acceptance and commitment therapy, I believe, was developed by Dr. Stephen Hayes some decades ago, I believe. And acceptance and commitment therapy effectively posits that we develop unhealthy habits because we unconsciously are trying to seek an escape from the difficulties of life. And we experience difficulties in life. We don't like those difficulties. And in order to avoid the discomfort that involves confronting those difficulties, we seek vices or hedonism. So, for example, some people might seek addictive behaviors, video games, drugs, alcohol, shopping. Some people are addicted to their work, can even be addicted to exercise, to the extent that it becomes unhealthy. You can almost be addicted to any behavior. We might seek avoidance as a coping mechanism, as I described. We might harbor unconscious resentment about the difficulties of life and express it through anger and aggression. Now, acceptance and commitment therapy has two parts to it. The first part is the acceptance part, which means being willing to recognize life can be difficult and we can't necessarily change life. We can't necessarily make life easy and eliminate all the problems from the world. We have to accept, ergo the term, that life is not perfect. But then we have the second part, commitment. And commitment involves recognizing that we all have values, and when we enact those unhealthy behaviors in response to life's difficulties, what we're actually doing is unsuccessfully trying to achieve our values. We have our values, we may hold them unconsciously, maybe we're not as aware of them, but we have them. And we're trying our best to meet those values, but we're doing it through means that are not achieving those values. So the commitment part involves deciding consciously to do different things, different actions that are going to allow us to achieve what those values purport, so that we no longer have to rely on those unhealthy coping mechanisms. It's a fairly flexible form of therapy, and I'm not sure how Dr. Hayes or any of his colleagues practice it, whether they would endorse this, but it leaves room for modalities like imagery and like visual guided exercises and linguistic work and imaging work. It leaves there's you can combine it with those types of techniques. What you're describing to me sounds similar in the sense that it involves becoming consciously aware of who you are and what you want, and then choosing the actions that are going to get you to that particular destination. It's curious how there are a number of different modalities that exist or theories that exist, and often they have roughly the same postulation about what we actually need to do to change.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is dependent on the person and the accountability, the level of accountability that that person is willing to take or accept for their level of change. I think we've gotten really, lazy, for lack of better terms, in what we need to do to help ourselves. We all are looking for the next best thing. We're looking for the easiest way to get out because life is hard. And when you start feeling like compound trauma, just thing after thing after thing after thing, and it's like, oh my gosh, I need to catch a break. Something has to help me. When really, we're sitting on our own gold mine because a lot of us are able to help ourselves simply by slowing down, learning a tool, applying the tool. Some people who they have all of these self-help books and self-love books, but they don't love themselves. Self-love is the first step in doing any of this because it doesn't matter what it is you're being taught. You're not going to apply any of these learnings if you don't love yourself. There is nothing magical about what anybody is doing in any of this industry. It's the individual that walks into the office that's ready. They're ready. They're ready for change. It can't be shaken into somebody. It's the accountability part, and accountability is scary because then you have to start to say, I can see some of the parts that I played in why I am where I'm at. And that is a very scary place. But when you get there and you're able to take that accountability, the way your life is able to change, the way you're able to go from not just surviving, but living and feeling life and looking at things differently. It's scary, but when you're equipped with the right tools and the right information for yourself, life completely changes for a lot of people.
You're absolutely right. And what's fascinating about any framework for change, be it a therapeutic framework or be it something that's even spiritual, is that often a lot of these philosophies have success, but they have success not because they involve magic, but because they influence and inspire the individual to take action that then leads to the desired outcome. And people often attribute the change directly to the philosophy when what's actually happening is it's their actions that are causing the change, and it was the philosophy that just inspired them to do so. So there are many paths to that outcome. I'm curious about the abstract nature of imagery, because not to say that it doesn't work for anyone, but in my practice, I prefer action as opposed to imagery or concrete behaviors. And the reason that I do that is that often, number one, imagery can be a bit too abstract for people to work with. Maybe it's different for different people. Some people are very visual thinkers, and some people might find that very empowering. But at the same time, it's easy for people, especially if they've been in therapy before and perhaps have had some negative experiences, to see concepts like positive affirmations or positive self-talk as something quite dismissive, as if to say, my problems are only because I'm talking to myself the wrong way. What I actually prefer to do in my own practice, and again, this is my philosophy on it, is when a client has a specific outcome that they want, my guidance to them is to always to enact it through the actions that are going to lead there, even if they don't believe that those actions are going to be fruitful. To give an example, if a client, this is hypothetical, but probably quite common and at the same time, that if a client doesn't believe that they are, for example, worth taking care of, and therefore they don't exercise, I know that they're worth taking care of. The client consciously knows that they're worth taking care of. They want to take care of themselves. But at the same time, as you say, what you consciously comprehend doesn't always match what you feel, the experience. So my guidance to them would be to find a form of, if exercise is the goal, find a form of exercise that they find useful to them and accessible, and do it regardless of how you feel about it. If it's walking 3 minutes a day on the treadmill, walk 3 minutes a day on the treadmill. If it's going for a 10-minute walk, go for a 10-minute walk. If it's using an exercise ball for half an hour, use the exercise ball for half an hour. Choose something accessible to you that's within your safety range, but do it regardless of how you feel. There's a powerful theory that I think underlies like the vast majority of our functioning that is not discussed enough in pop psychology or even academic psychology, sadly enough. It's called reciprocal determinism. Dr. Albert Bandura in the 1960s coined it. Effectively, what it means is our thoughts, feelings, actions, and the external world all influence each other. And it influences each other through behavior. So if we think a certain way and feel a certain way, then we're going to act a certain way. If we act a certain way, it's going to confirm and perpetuate those thoughts and feelings, which is also going to influence how we act towards other people, which is going to influence how they act towards us. But the inverse, the relationship can work in any one of those directions. If we act a certain way, it will then influence how we think and feel. If you enact something, because it is a concrete process, and you know you can do it because you are observing yourself doing it in the moment, and regardless of how you feel about it, it's going to have an outcome. Even if you can't visualize something, do it. And don't worry about how many times you fall down. I mean, assuming it's a safe process, something that's not going to endanger your life. No matter how many times you make a mistake or do it, keep doing it. Keep practicing. Because eventually, you're going to look back on that progress, and not only are you going to have achieved something by it, you're effectively going to have demonstrated to yourself that regardless of what you think of yourself, you can still do things. And the fact that you thought that you couldn't do those things didn't change the reality. It only influenced how you saw it.
Yeah, I love that. And, any step is bigger than taking no step. Anything that you're doing to get you closer to your goal is better than staying stagnant and not doing anything at all. So even if it is 1 minute, that is 1 minute longer than what you did yesterday. And before you know it, you're going to find yourself finding this rhythm of positivity. When I did it for 1 minute, I'm going to try to go for 2. I'm going to try to go for 3. And then you're going to be like, oh, look at me. And you're building your own self-esteem, your own confidence in yourself, seeing your own ability. A lot of us are just in our own way. That's the thing. Like, get out of your own way. Just get out of your way. And when you do little steps always lead to big changes.
Absolutely. There's one more question I'd like to ask about neurolinguistic programming, Darcie, and it's to do with some of the culture that surrounds it, some of the pop culture. Now, people who know my work know that I'm not a fan of popular thought. Things don't necessarily become popular because they're true. They become popular based on how we feel about them, and our feelings don't always accurately represent reality, so we shouldn't take it as absolute truth. And at the same time, I'm also skeptical of terms like pseudoscience and not scientifically validated, because yes, scientific validation is important, but all too often people use the concept without knowing exactly why it's important and what the limitations are. I've known of criticisms leveled at frameworks like neurolinguistic program. People have said it's a pseudoscience or it's not validated. I don't know anything about the people who developed it. I'm not going to make any claims. What are your thoughts on it? What's your opinion on these views of your practice?
Well, I think that everybody has a right to their opinion. And I think whatever works for one person may not work for somebody else. I think some people view, like you said, apples. Like apples are healthy and we should all eat an apple a day. And some people may say, well, I'm fine drinking my soda every single day. And that's how they view that's what that is for themselves. I think so many of us have become so overly opinionated and judgy about what other people are doing to help themselves, when what we should really be focused on is the fact that people are searching for help. People are searching for help. Whether somebody gets on a weight loss journey and loses weight by being a vegan or having the carnivore diet or doing keto or just straight drinking water and working out, who cares? The fact is that they're on a health journey for themselves to become mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually stronger. The same thing when someone's searching out mental health. If they're looking for something, they're not looking for something because this is a joyride. They're looking for something because they want off. They want off the ride. They're sick of being on this merry-go-round. They're tired of living in this state of fear or panic or sadness or grief all of the time. And they just want off. So, there's so many opinions about all different things out here and who's doing what and why. I honestly think if social media didn't exist, nobody would even care. But it's so in our face all the time what everybody is doing, and what we should do is become, instead of a critic, we should start becoming a cheerleader and cheering people on that are just trying to find the best way for them to help get unstuck from the trauma and grounded in the healing that they're looking for.
I have to admit that I am something of a skeptic myself. I've been a skeptic of spirituality. I've interviewed spiritual practitioners, by the way, and they've been rather enlightening in the way that they've described their practices. I have to say that I also want to treat each person as an individual, and I have to say that I was skeptical about neurolinguistic programming before I entered this interview today, and I've now finished this interview, and I'm rather enlightened, and I really like your ethos. I have to say that even if it's not the same modality that I would use, or I may have, criticisms about other coaching practices. With that, I want to say thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for helping people to become unstuck. It's always good to have more people like you in the world.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you for having me. It's always so great to talk about any way that we can help people find whatever joy, happiness, peace that they're looking for. So thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, and to the audience, thank you so much for joining us today. If you are seeking Darcie, you will find her links in the description of this episode. If you have concerns about yourself or somebody else, please do not take what you find on the internet or in the media as advice. Please seek advice from a professional or somebody else that you trust. If you're in Australia and seeking counselling from me, you'll find my contact details in the description. If you have feedback on the program, please feel free to contact me. I really appreciate feedback from the audience of all descriptions. And until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves.